Today we are going to discuss how you right there, I see you, how you can stop playing paired boards terribly in No Limit Texas Hold'em. I see so many players not understanding range and nut advantage on paired boards, which cause them to make huge, gigantic mistakes and blunders on a very regular basis. Also, a lot of players think, I'm going to have a strategy on all paired boards. But all paired boards are not the same because you're not equally likely to have trips on some boards compared to others. I'm going to take you through a few examples today and show you the differences for how you should be playing paired boards so that you do not make blunders. First, we're going to talk about playing 40 big blinds deep on King 6. In this hand, under the gun +1 raises, and you call from the big blind. The flop becomes King 6. You check. Under the gun +1 bets tiny 25% pot, as they should do with their entire range. What you want to ask yourself is who has the range and or nut advantage? Well, this is your opponent's strategy. They're raising with this range from under the gun +1. They are betting frequently and tiny with everything. Notice they have a whole lot of kings in their range. Also, they have a lot of pairs that are pretty good. And some ace highs that are also pretty good. They're betting frequently and small with 99.96% of their range. That is plenty. If you enjoy betting small with 100% of your range correctly, click the like and subscribe button down below. Click the notification bell. By the way, we are using PEAKGTO today to go through these scenarios. Make sure you check out PEAKGTO if you have not. The link will be down there in the description below. How should you respond against this bet? Well, considering your range and how you have a whole lot of garbage on King 6, you're going to have to fold a lot. In this scenario, you have the range and nut disadvantage. Even though you do have some kings in your range, as you see, you're putting in a raise with a lot of them. The red is raise, the green is call, the blue is fold. You also have a whole lot of garbage. Like this whole block is just terrible. All these offsuit hands are terrible. Even ace high is not loving it because you're going to be out of position. And if you face a bet on the turn and or river, you also don't love it. So this is a spot where you just don't have a lot of good hands. And because you don't have a lot of good hands, you have to do a lot of checking and folding. In general, on paired boards, when you do decide to continue, you're going to do a pretty good amount of raising. And that is more and more true as you have more and more trips proportionally in your range than your opponent. So in this spot, when we are raising, we're raising a lot of our King X and then a lot of cards that wrap around the cards that are on the board. So hands like Queen Jack, Queen 10, Jack 10, with backdoor flush draws. I'm going to do a lot of raising. And then hands like 7-5, 8-7, 9-7, 9-8 that kind of go with the 6 with backdoor flush draws are going to do a lot of raising. Without the backdoor flush draws, you do a pretty good amount of folding. And if you don't have a pair or a lot of backdoor equity or ace high, you simply get out of the way. You're folding 59% of your range to that 25% pot bet because this board is so bad for you. Have you ever studied GTO poker strategies and thought it actually made you worse at poker? Well, it probably did, and that's why we have created PEAKGTO, the easiest place to learn GTO poker strategies where you will be learning directly from top pros so that you can improve your skills, bump up your poker ELO rating, and actually get really good at poker. Get started for free right now. What if we change the scenario just a little bit and say, instead of the under the gun +1 player raising, the button is the player raising? Well, now ranges are different. Now, your opponent is still betting frequently and small with their entire range, but now you get to raise way more often because you have way more King X in your range. You would defend all the King X before the flop in this scenario, plus a whole lot more 6X, which is pretty good. So now you get to stick around way more often. Notice now you're only folding 47% of the time, and you are raising a pretty good amount of the time as well, 33% of the time compared to the previous scenario where you were only raising 17% of the time. So the fact that your range changed by containing more trips allows you to raise way more often. Notice roughly the same type of hands are raising, except for you get to raise with more bluffs instead of only Queen 10 with backdoor flush draw or 8-7 with backdoor flush draw. You get to raise with more of those now, and you also get to raise with some of the offsuit hands. As you have more value hands, you get to raise with more bluffs. So this is a spot where you get to raise far more aggressively because you have more trips, because your range was wider pre-flop because your opponent's initial button raising range was wider. Let's take a look at a spot that is even better for you. Say 25 big blinds deep, it comes Jack 6-6. In this scenario, under the gun +1 raises, you call from the big blind. You check, they bet tiny. In this scenario, they actually should not be betting with their entire range on this flop. Why? Because they have almost no sixes. Look at their range, right? They have almost no sixes in their range. And spoiler alert, you're going to have a lot. So this is a spot where the initial raiser has to be very cautious. They should be checking it back 38% of the time. A lot of people do not do that. Instead, they just continuation bet 100% of the time because they think paired board, bet small, boom. And to be fair, that's probably okay against most people because most people don't check raise nearly often enough. Notice this player's equity is very high, 63%, but they completely lack the nuts. Take a look at all of these sixes. Even though you have relatively little equity in the spot, you have a ton of super nut hands that can put in the raise. And because you have a ton of nut hands that can put in the raise, you check raise a ton. Notice now you are check raising about 36% of the time, and you're calling pretty infrequently, only 7% of the time. As the pair is more so in your range and not in your opponent's range, in those scenarios, you check raise very, 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 very often. In this spot, the opponent bet something like 1.5 big blinds. We're making it 4.7, so a very, very small raise in this situation with lots of sixes, lots of jacks, and then again, lots of cards that wrap around the jack and the six. So you see stuff like Queen 10, Queen 9, King 9, King Queen, some overcards. When the top card is the one that's not paired, the overcards to that card are often going to be raising, like an ace, a king, and a queen in this scenario with a backdoor flush draw. A lot of those opt to raise. And then cards that wrap around the six, like 8-7, 9-7, 9-8, 7-5, 5-4 with backdoor flush draws. Lots of those put in raises. In terms of hands that like to call, it's going to be your very marginal stuff like good ace highs, some top pairs with bad kickers, and some hands like pocket pairs. But this is a spot where you have a complete lack of range advantage, but you have a huge nut advantage. And when you have a huge nut advantage, you do a lot of raising. We actually discussed this concept thoroughly in the tournament and cash game masterclasses at PokerCoaching.com. Make sure you check those out if you have not already. Let's go through one more spot. Now, the button raises you call from the big blind. So you're going to have a lot of sixes, but now, so are they. In this scenario, take a look at the buttons range now. Now they have a lot of sixes, but less equity. They have less equity despite having some sixes because now they have a whole lot more random unpaired hands. So this is a spot where they cannot continuation bet too often. They are forced to check about half of the time. And when they bet, they're going to have a slightly better range. Despite that, you actually have a whole lot of sixes too. So you, again, are going to be check raising very often. So now, even though your opponent does have some sixes, you do too. You're check raising those, lots of jacks as well, and a whole lot of hands with backdoor equity. Ask yourself, honestly, do you make this play? If you're sitting here with the Queen 10 offsuit, you check, your opponent bets small. They bet 1.5 big blinds. Are you really putting in 4.7 big blinds or so with your Queen 10 offsuit and your Queen 9 offsuit and your Ace 4 offsuit and your 8-5 of hearts? Most people don't. Most people fold. And if you're playing against someone who's going to drastically overfold to a small flop continuation bet, well, you should absolutely run them over by continuation betting frequently and small. Instead of betting only half the time, as your opponent should do, you should bet every single time. Because I can guarantee you, most people in most games may call with all these hands in red, but they're not raising. And because they don't raise, that allows you to realize your equity. If you can bet with something like King 10 and then know your opponent's never going to raise you, that's fine, right? And it's especially fine if they're going to be folding out hands that do okay against your King 10 in spots like this. So make sure you are playing these spots adequately so your opponent's mistake of continuation betting close to 100% doesn't actually work out very well in their favor. So that's it for today. That is how you can stop playing terribly on paired boards. Remember that there are a lot of variables that should affect how you play on the paired boards. The card that is paired, your position, your opponent's position, the stack depths, all these things are vitally important to help you determine who has both the range and the nut advantage. You can use this knowledge to your advantage and attack the players who are continuation betting too frequently. If your opponent continuation bets too often, raise them aggressively, especially when you have the nut advantage. And when you don't have the nut advantage, if they're continuation betting too frequently, you should also stick around a lot more by calling. So get in there, Don't be a weak, tight knit. Don't get pushed around on the paired boards and crush your opponents. Thanks again for watching. If you have not already checked out PEAKGTO, make sure you do. We have a link down there below. Good luck in your games. Have fun. And I'll talk to you next time.